All right. Are you going back?
I got you.
Good morning.
No crazy.
We have a bunch of crazy water babies this morning.
Okay, Abby, we start to shush now. Say hello.
You can say hello if you like, or whatever.
Good evening.
They couldn't resist the water this morning. It was really, really nice and warm.
No, it's cold actually. It's very cold.
Cold. Must be all the rain. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, good morning if you're joining us. Welcome.
Happy Sunday.
Yep, and what a beautiful day. We had so much rain, and we're so thankful today that you have a bit of sun out here. So it's really nice out here today.
Morning, Shani. Morning, Robbie.
Welcome.
Morning,
welcome.
Gaggy.
Claudia. Thanks for joining with us this morning.
You know when you bath puppies
Yeah,
and they come out the water and they're a bit. Yeah.
that's what's going on here.
That's what happens after a swim. With
Morning,
certain
Shannon.
People.
And I mean Sharon, and Shannon.
Yes, hello Sharon, Engelbrecht. Good morning.
Trust you all had a good week, productive, and that you can take a little bit of time today to just relax. And we're thankful to have you with us, even if you're watching a little bit later. Just take a moment of reflection in the scriptures, and yeah, so we're happy to have you here. I think I'm going to ask the puppies to dismiss. Okay, guys, thank you. Bye. Okay, Grace, thank you. Right. I'm still a bit like that, eh? All right, awesome. We're in the book of Mark, and we're walking quite slowly through it. And so today we are in Mark chapter 3, and we're going to start from verse 20. So, all right. Yes?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, in chapter 3, last week we spoke about what Jesus and his disciples did on the Sabbath. They simulated a small harvest and also healed on the Sabbath. So the religious leaders weren't very happy about that. That's not what they used to. We can't blame them. We can't point fingers at them. That's how they grew up. That's what they understand about God. When God himself comes and says, hello, I'm moving on, it's hard. It's hard to adjust when your whole life has been in a certain direction, and this is the understanding you've had about God, and suddenly God reveals himself in a different direction maybe, or in a more loving way than what you thought, or just in different ways. It's hard to adjust. It is really hard, and today is kind of along those lines again. So Jesus finds himself in hot water again, especially now that after he has healed someone on the Sabbath, which is a real problem. And as we read, it was after this that they started making plans to actually destroy him because of what he was teaching and how he was, they felt, at least the scribes, Pharisees, they felt he was leading people astray. And so they, in their good conscience, and I think we forget that sometimes, that they were acting in good conscience. They were possibly blind to their own hypocrisy, as many of us are. We all need someone to call us out from time to time and say, hey, what you're doing now doesn't line up with love. This looks like hypocrisy. And that's kind of what Jesus was for them. He was a mirror to them, and they weren't able to see that. And today is about exactly that. Allowing God to be, and the Spirit of God specifically in our lives, to be a mirror for us, to call out certain things in our lives. So we're going to be talking about that. Basically, Jesus goes to Galilee. He heals another man there. There's a guy with an unclean spirit, and it's just commotion wherever he goes. But the result is that wherever he goes, people are left better than what he found them, right? Whether it was healing naturally or physically or spiritually or emotionally. He leaves people better off than when he found them. And this is a problem, because what happens now is he starts getting a lot of people that follow him. And this is a problem for the Sadducees, the scribes. It's also a problem for Rome to some degree, to have some, just a normal carpenter have such a great following. It could lead to a revolution. within the Roman context, but also spiritually and in terms of the Jewish construct of the law, the priests, and that type of situation. It's a real problem. So I'm going to read from Mark 3, verse 20. The multitude came together as they were so busy they couldn't even have time to eat bread. And when his friends heard, they wanted to lay hold of him, for they said that he's beside himself, or that he's losing it. Like, that was the perspective. So I suspect there was quite a bit of commotion going on wherever he went. They were concerned for him, I guess, to some degree. But the scribes and the Pharisees appear on the scene here in verse 22. They came down from Jerusalem. Okay, they're taking a walk. This must be quite important. And they were arguing the following, because you can understand that they have a real dilemma. Jesus is violating rituals. He's violating the religious norm. He's violating the law of God, in their mind at least. He's making broken people better, and multitudes are following him. So as a scribe and a Pharisee, what do you actually do now? Like, what do you do with this? Because if it was someone hurting people, it's so easy to create a negative rhetoric about him. But he's healing people. People love him. People are following. What do you do with this? So they come up with a genius plan, right? And the genius plan is this. They said, he has Beelzebub. Now, in those times, Beelzebub was like, it literally means Lord of the house, God of the dung god. You know, that's why sometimes it's connected to flies, I guess. But he said they made this argument, genius argument here by the scribes, in saying that he casts out all these devils by the power of the devil. Right? So they make an argument that he is able to remove sickness, remove emotional problems, remove evil spirits, because as someone who already operates by an evil spirit, he can actually do that. So that's the best they can come up with, because in light of the evidence, he's actually doing a whole lot of good in the area. But when Jesus gets wind of this, and I'm assuming that eventually they actually get to Galilee, to where he is, he calls them out on this. And he says this in verse 23, and he makes a very simple statement and really kind of debunks the type of argument. And he says, how can Satan cast out Satan? Right? And so he makes it's a very powerful statement, and it's actually the logical one to make. They kind of ventured off into a stupid argument because they had no other ground to stand on, saying to him that he's casting out devils by devils. So he's doing good from an evil place. And he basically makes the point, he says, how can Satan cast out Satan? And he takes his time, as he would normally do, and he tells the parable of a kingdom that's divided against itself, and uses the idea of a kingdom with its armies fighting itself, that it can never stand or remain. And then he also uses the idea of a household, that as a household, family with a dad, a mom, and in those times it would have been slaves and children and dogs and donkeys and all of that. How if it was divided against itself, it would never be able to stand. So he's making a pretty good argument here. He also says that if you wanted to spoil or go into someone's house and take their stuff, first you've got to bind the strong man before you can take this stuff. And the argument he is making is very simple. He says, it is illogical to say that I'm doing this through evil. I'm doing good for good. I'm not doing this as an evil, with an evil motive. And so his argument is summed up by his first little sentence in verse 23. How can Satan cast out Satan? But what we'd like to get to today is this, that Jesus is actually highlighting a real deep problem here. And it's a problem that wasn't just present in this time. It's a problem that Israel have had to deal with all their time. And unfortunately for Israel, we have so much writing about them that, we can always point the finger at them. Yeah, they've always been like that. But really, the story of Israel is the story of everyone. And so we're not picking on Israel. It's just that it was recorded for our admonition, so we could actually look inward. So whenever we do point back into history to the nation Israel, their real struggles in following what God had given to them, we're really pointing to ourselves. And we shouldn't be saying, because if we don't, we might end up in some form of a I'm sorry, I didn't know the right word, but when people are looking down on Jews and a form of a discrimination, which, you know, we know in history has had some really, really bad results. That's not what we're doing here. Israel's history is written so we can reflect on ourselves. And so what's happening here is Jesus actually is highlighting a deep problem within the scribes. It's a problem within the Jewish leadership. It's a problem within Israel. It's actually a problem within religion. And it's also a problem within me and you. And this is where it becomes, you know, where it lands for us. Is this really a deeper problem of humanity that he is dealing with here that's only manifesting himself in these moments? So what is this deeper problem? Well, he goes on to say, let me read these verses and I'm going to explain them, or try to explain them. He says, verily I'm telling you, all sins can be forgiven to the sons of men, and even blasphemies with which people blaspheme, right? That seems quite nice. Okay, great. But he that blasphemes against the Holy Spirit has never forgiveness, but is in danger of eternal damnation. Now, the way I just grew up with this is very simple. You can get away with anything and get forgiveness for it. But if you say or do something against the Spirit of God specifically, you're going to hell. And there's nobody can help you and nobody can rescue you. Now, of course, I don't take that view of this, but I want to at least try and explain this in context of this deep problem that's sitting within the scribes and the Pharisees. Jesus is alluding to the fact, or is highlighting the fact, there's a lot of things in life that we can do wrong, a lot of missteps. We can miss the mark in many areas of life, and that we can eventually overcome those problems that these missteps and missing the mark create in our own lives. We can call this blasphemies, sin. Sin means to miss the mark. Blasphemy here, maybe in its very literal sense, at least here in the Greek word, means to vilify something. In other words, blasphemy would be to vilify God, or to vilify something which is good and make it look as bad. Because that's kind of what they were doing here, right? Yeah. The scribes are doing here. So there's a lot of things we could, actually anything in life we can overcome. But the one thing that's going to kind of toss us into a deep pit is when we start seeing that which is good as that which is evil. Because when we start doing that, it's actually the good that has the power to transform us, to save us, to deliver us, to bring progress into us, to form us into the image of God, as we would say. But once you start seeing that which is light as darkness, now you have a problem. Yeah. It's like when you're drowning in the ocean. It doesn't matter where you're drowning and how you're drowning. If you can get a boat, if a boat can get to you, it can save you, no matter where you are on the ocean, right? That type of analogy. But if you start seeing the boat and demonizing the boat, you're done. Your tickets. And the language Jesus used here is eternal damnation, which literally, which kind of just means the Greek word for damnation here is krisis, which is where we get, I guess, crisis from. You put yourself in a perpetual crisis when you start seeing that which is light as darkness, or that which is good that comes to heal and bring life as that which is bad. So that's a deep problem that it seems Jesus, well, it manifests itself quite clearly in this situation, but it seems like there's a long history in the nation of Israel of seeing the good as something bad. So the Jewish leaders had a reputation for vilifying the good. And if you read back in their history, all the prophets that they later themselves acknowledged actually came from God and came to warn the people and lead them in the right direction. We can say that brought light to them and direction. They vilified them and they killed them. Jesus makes mention of this in Matthew 23, at the end of that chapter, if you like to refer to it at some point. He actually says to them, guys, that I wanted to, but you don't want to. And this is going to lead to some form of desolation in your life, some form of real perpetual crisis. Because when I wanted to help you, you vilified me. When I sent the boat, you demonized it. And this is now manifesting here. Here I am, I'm helping, I'm doing good, but you see this as evil. Yeah. How do you help someone that's caught in this deep cycle of misrepresentation? And maybe we can posit this as a definition for ignorance. Ignorance is when we call good evil and evil good. And I know for some of you might say, oh no, we don't do that. But I've come to realize in my life that I actually do that quite often. I do it systemically, like I grew up with some things that I see as good are actually evil. I can always use certain examples. I don't want to use the same one always, but one of the best examples is maybe the way that I saw my forefathers treat other races. I thought was fine and good, and they were so nice to them. You know, they gave them water and gave them food, but I didn't realize they gave them water in a tin cup and not a proper glass. What I thought was good because I saw it as generosity, I realized later this wasn't light. This was actually darkness. It was masquerading in my mind, at least, as a good act. But I realize now that it was draped in a lot of prejudice and misunderstanding. Okay, so I don't want to use too many examples, but that's a pretty good one that I know that some of you might be able to identify with. So this is a very, very, very dark place, or a very dangerous place to be in your life with regards to any issue, with regards to any understanding, is to see that which is truly dark actually as light, or that which is light which comes to you, and to vilify it as that which is dark. And maybe this is a way to explain what ignorance is, that I believe the Spirit of God is leading us out of ignorance. He does that continuously, right? Jesus and his mission is characterized by the gospel writers and also by Paul and Peter as a mission of light, a light to the nations. It's used in the Old Testament in that way. But in the New Testament, for instance, there's one portion where it said, the people sat in the darkness and saw a great light. And so that's how the mission of Jesus is told.
You can be sitting in darkness and not know you're in the darkness until the light
exactly
comes.
And then the challenge still is in those moments to see light as actually light and not as a threatening force, because if you're so used to,
if you're comfortable with your darkness,
when you become comfortable to your darkness, Tori, bright light is not welcome. You know, if you're sleeping at night and you've got all the lights off and you know it's dark and you're having a good time, and the next minute your son is next to you with a torch in your face, like that sobering moment, that light is actually an enemy in that moment. Or when you come out of a dark tunnel and you embrace the sunlight again, in that moment your whole body reacts to that light. It wants to, you close your eyes, you squint your eyes, because the light is offensive as it comes in its early stages. But as we grow into being kind of used to it, it becomes useful, of course, to us. So Christ is seen as light. When you read the book of John 1, if you want to read that afterwards today, he's depicted as the light of life that comes. We are depicted as people who sit in darkness, in other words, in ignorance to some sense. And he comes to show the way, he comes to light the path. But the reality is that as humans, we have a natural instinct. And sometimes our natural instinct is not friendly to light that comes to us, right? So John 1 particularly describes 3 types of reactions to the light that humans have. And John writes it like this: darkness does not comprehend light. In other words, the word there, it literally means it's not eager to grab hold of it and seize it and love it, because there's not enough understanding, a misunderstanding between these two things. And so one of the natural reactions as humans is we don't comprehend. We don't, at first at least. It's strange to us. We're not eager to grab hold of it. The second one is we don't know it or recognize it, because obviously darkness and light are 2 very different things. And so when you're used to light, you don't necessarily recognize light for what it is. It's in sharp contrast to our darkness, I guess. The last one from John 1 to 11 is that those who sit in darkness don't want to initially associate with light. And this is also strange because, you know, we think of ourselves, I think of myself as someone that loves the good and loves to embrace which is right and which is good and which is light. But I have realized in my many years of life, I've realized that is actually not how things work. When light comes at first, it's offensive. I can name many examples of my life where it was actually light, but I saw it as darkness. I perceived it as darkness coming at me and attacking me. It's only 5 years later that I realized that was a moment of light in my life. And I many times also describe my experiences with God as moments of great darkness, like a deep pit where I can't see anything in the moment as darkness. But over time I realized that was the moment of light. And if you go to the Old Testament, you'll even find some scriptures that speaks about God that hides himself in the darkness. Well, the point is simply that in those moments, it's our darkness that makes the light strange,
That's when
unattainable.
you become aware that you are in darkness.
Yes.
Because the light is coming in.
Yes, but not at first. At first it's always, and the knee-jerk reaction is, what is this? This is bad. It's uncomfortable. I don't want it. But over time we realize that what seems dark actually can be light for us. And this is the problem that Jesus addresses here with the Pharisees, is that when the light shines upon them, they can't recognize it as light, and they call it evil. They vilify it in that moment because it's outside of their box. It's outside of their religion. It's outside of their mindset about who God can be. If God said don't do anything on the Sabbath, how can God come and do something on the Sabbath? They can't work with that. They can't deal with that. And the truth is we can't deal with it either today. We still struggle with these issues today. We have a certain perspective on who God is, what he is, how he works and how he doesn't work. And the moment God breaks our box a little bit, I know people that call it the devil because they can't recognize it as the light of God because it seems so strange in those moments. Right. So we can expect these type of reactions. And I think it's important that we as people who are pursuing spirituality, who are pursuing God in our life, who are pursuing a better life and pursuing that which is right and which is true, that we know and we recognize that these moments can seem uncomprehendable, unrecognizable, and something we in the moment don't want to associate with. I think it's important we know that when true light does come, it often feels like that. And this is what maybe the Pharisees are feeling, scribes are feeling at that moment. This can't be right because it's too offensive to us. Okay, so, but what is the problem? And what I'm saying is that these reactions are normal, but don't go beyond those reactions and call it evil. Because then you are stepping into the territory that Jesus is explaining to the Pharisees, that when you start calling good evil, in other words, you're not just saying, I'm not sure, give me some time, let me just think about this. You're saying, this is, you grow up in church, this is the devil, this is demons, this is, on Facebook, somebody called my friend a warlock, my pastor friend a warlock yesterday, calling light darkness. This is someone who's highly religious. I mean, seeing light as darkness, it's crazy, but it does happen. And it is part of the process we need to recognize. So, but calling light evil is to jump into a bottomless pit. It's to shun away the rescue boat that's on its way. And until we see light as light, we really are, to some sense, doomed to a perpetual crisis. Because it is that light, Tori, that changes us and that transforms us. So Christ is light. And this is also the nature of the mission of Christ, that he wants that light to dwell in us. Now, if you know a little bit about the New Testament, you'll know that in the beginning Jesus says, I'm the light of the world, I've come to bring light and life, etc., etc. And then later on, he moves on and he says, but I want you to be the light of the world. In other words, I want to enlighten you. I want you to be now light. And I think it's I think it's a real simple thing. Jesus is not physically here in flesh, and somebody else needs to bear that light. And so he hands over the baton really to us. And he is saying that the light I brought, and I want that light to be in you. And the Spirit of God keeps on obviously bringing understanding and light to our darkness. When he says you are the light of the world. Now I just want to go back quickly to a little portion that's found in the book of Luke, and you can go read it. I think it starts in 33 to 36, but I want to highlight verse 34 and 35 of Luke 11, which is something it's quite an odd little portion. It's hard to make real sense of it. You can't take it literally because it makes absolutely no sense. But maybe in this context, it helps us to see a little bit that Jesus was actually addressing this problem very early on. He says the light of the body is the eye. Now, the eye in this context, as far as I can understand from reading, is about the mind. It's about the thought process. It's really about our thoughts and how we think and how we understand. So he says the light of the body, the light of any person, is the way he understands, right? Therefore, when your eye is single, when your eye is not double-minded, is the literal translation. In other words, when you are focused in the right direction, your whole body is full of light, right? But when your eye is evil, or when your eye doesn't know which direction to look, or your understanding is thwarted, or it's underdeveloped to some degree, or it lives in ignorance, then your body is full of darkness. So Jesus basically just used the mind or the understanding of a person to tell us that good understanding brings light. Bad understanding or ignorance brings darkness. But then he goes on to say the following. He says, be careful that the light which is in you is not darkness. So that's actually weird because it's a contradiction. How can light be darkness? Unless what he means here is be careful of living a life where you think...
Where you don't perceive the light to be darkness.
Yes, but or both of them talk, but this one, that which in you is dark, you consider it to actually be light. But I mean the opposite and vice versa. That which you perceive to be dark is actually a light. But it's more likely that me and you, especially in Christian circles, in growing up in a place where, we feel like we've got everything figured out and we become very self-righteous very quickly, it's usually the case that we consider our own darkness as light. It's usually the case that many times when we're acting and when we're doing stuff, it comes from a dark place and not a light place. And so Jesus warns very early on here, and coincidentally, this portion about the eye and the mind and light and darkness is not found in Mark, it's only found in Luke and Matthew. But he early on warns, be careful that what you think is light in you is actually darkness. And this is exactly what he encounters with these scribes here. They are exactly at that place. It wouldn't even surprise me if that's who he had in mind. But obviously it goes beyond the scribes, and it speaks to me and you today. And the Spirit of God is still sending us light and truth. And we need to be careful that we haven't come to the place where we have now started calling our own darkness light. Because then we are turning away the rescue boat. Then we are jumping into a bottomless pit, and we are shunning away that which really can help transform, save us. So that which you receive and recognize as light in yourself is not actually darkness. Be careful of that. That which some of the things we hold on to, some of the ways we are, the ways we do things, we consider it a good thing because it's like we've become self-righteous about the way we do stuff. And we can't recognize it actually as a darkness that needs to be dealt with, within us. So this position leads to perpetual crisis. I'm almost finished. It also leads to stagnation. Jesus uses the metaphor weeping and gnashing of teeth, or he uses outer darkness. In other words, it's outer darkness because how do you save someone in the darkness when they won't receive light, or specifically when they start calling light as darkness? So how do we discern light from darkness? And I just want to maybe just put one or two or three things out here. This is a complicated topic, of course. But some of the things that have become important to me over my life, my experience, I know some of you will be able to identify with some of this, but the real problem is this, that anything that's done within religious circle, within religious command, within religious authority or ritual is seen to be good, and that's not necessarily true. And I think we need to get back to a place where we recognize light for light and darkness for darkness. There's a lot of darkness in churches. There's a lot of light in churches. And the reason for that is there's a lot of darkness in people and there's a lot of light in people. And we need to get back to just simply understanding and recognizing the light for what it is. So I've just got 4 things here that the Gospels identify with light. Number one, good works. Matthew 5 verse 16. Good works. Good old simple, Tori. Good old simple.
Good old being
Ancient.
being nice.
Kindness and goodness comes from light.
And that could also, you could call that in a more, what we used to hearing in church is fruit.
Yeah,
But-
yeah, absolutely.
But particularly works,
Yeah.
good works, yeah.
Yeah, good works. Being kind to people, being patient with people. That is light. Now, the problem for many of us, especially for people like me and where I come from, is when I see goodness outside of my church environment, I don't see it as light. I only see the good inside my church environment as light. And I think we need to realize and recognize light for light. Light is light. It doesn't matter where it is found and by whom it is practiced. Even some horrible people do light things from time to time. Light remains light no matter where it's done. So, the obvious goodness and kindness, even when it goes against religious tradition, it's still light and it's still good. And this is
Like all the things they had problems with about Jesus.
it's exactly what's happening here. I almost said leaf,
What's
but I
wrong with
mean
that?
leaf. Yeah, it's exactly what's happening here. Jesus is doing stuff against people's idea of who God is and what God is, and therefore they're calling good evil. And I think we're still doing exactly the same
Yeah.
thing today,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Healing people on the Sabbath, etc. Number two is light guides our feet to the way of peace. It's another way that you know that there's light, is there's peace. You know, we often say, how do you feel about this? You know, that. Do you have peace? That's a really good thing to say, because the light of God brings peace, right? Peacemakers carry light. Blessed are the peacemakers. They will be called the sons of God. In other words, the life of peacemakers will be recognized as the light of God present in people, right? Religious bigotry, quarreling, and endless strife is not light. Even if you find it on a pulpit, even if you find it in your pastor, even if you find it in your priest, no matter where you find it, it's not light. Quarreling and strife is not light.
Yeah.
John 1 verse 4 then he also uses this life. His life is the light of men. And so light is also equated to life. And the Greek word here is zoe life. It means, some would say it's spirit life. But I also believe it's got to do with freedom and forgiveness and restoration and
Because that's real living.
real living. Even though you might not always have everything you need financially, it's the life of freedom, the life of forgiveness, of restoration. And then the last one is the most obvious one, is the life of love. Light is love. If you read the book of John, you can come to no other conclusion that what John and us today metaphorically call light, we really mean love. That's really what we mean. He would say, those who hate their brother is in darkness. So light really is love. So, and love is not just found, agape is not just found in our church or amongst Christians. Agape is found everywhere. Recognize it for what it is. Recognize it. Celebrate agape where it's found. Doesn't matter where it is found. Even if it's found in a Buddhist or in a Muslim or in a Hindu or in an atheist, love is love. Light is light. Right. So just these four things. It's good old simple good works and kindness. Peace. Peaceful people. People who make peace. Number 3, life of freedom, forgiveness, restoration, and love. The selfless type of love. The biblical word for that, or the Greek word, would be agape type of love. Just a quick contrast. What is darkness? Well, darkness is ignorance, it's fear, it's hurt, it's deadness. Hardness also would mean to be asleep, and we'll just say something about that in a moment. Let me read for you something that Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:6. He says, "For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness," he's referring back to the Israeli creation account, right? And go read the book of Genesis. It's about light coming out of darkness. Even before there was a sun, even before there was anything that could give natural light, there's the idea of light coming forth out of darkness. If you read the ancient text, it's about order from chaos. It's about understanding from ignorance. So Paul pulls on that and he says, God who commanded the light to shine out of darkness has shined in our hearts. And so in other words, what God did in the universe to bring light out of darkness, he is also doing in us. Right? To give light, and here's how he describes that light. It's the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Now this, if you're not a Bible student or you're not someone who reads the Bible a lot, it sounds like a little bit of mumbo jumbo. But it simply just means to understand that Jesus is what God looks like, and that's what he wants to be in you. It's a simple understanding of that. So God calls us to live in the light of his love for us, but we need to know how to discern what is light and what is darkness. And that has to go beyond our little box
Framework,
that we have built, exemplified by the religious box the scribes are highlighting here in the book of Mark. The only problem we do have, and this is important, is that darkness often clothes itself in religion. There's a portion that says, as an angel of light. And so many times we perceive things as light when they're actually darkness because of how it's clothed itself. It comes with beautiful speech. It comes with what I call Christianese. Bless thee, O brother, bless, O God, etc., etc. And just because those words are used, we assume that light is about to pour forth. But some of the greatest manipulations, some of the deepest evils come behind those words. And so we need to know that darkness has a way of clothing itself in light. In other words, it wants to appear. It takes on... parades as light. It uses our religious... I'm personifying it, but I don't want to. But it uses our religious cloak, our religious customs to hide itself. We need to be able to discern in our own life. Ephesians 5 verse 6 says the following. It says, for you were sometimes in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. So this may be another way of looking at what light will produce in us is goodness, righteousness, what is right, and truth is what is true. Tori, a lot of things we believe is not true. It means there's no light. It means there's ignorance there. Ignorance we're not willing to deal with. In verse 14 of the same chapter, he ends, and I end with this. He says, excuse the King James, wherefore, he says, awake you that sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. And so here it's actually quite clear that Paul sees darkness as a slumber. People who are living, walking, but they're actually asleep because they can't see their darkness. And so one of the things that the Spirit of God does in humanity still today, and is pushing for in your life and in mine, is to bring light, to enlighten. Our danger is that we call that light darkness, that we vilify that light as darkness. And of course the other way around, that we just assume that all the darkness and the slumber and the sleeping, the stuff we are almost unconscious of, that we are part of, is light. That is what true Christianity, I believe, is God coming, confronting us where we are and drawing us, shining a light on our lives. And this is a very personal message. This is not a message against systems so much as it is just a message of personal growth, personal transition and transformation.
For me, listening to this, it's not to say, okay, now that I've got this in my heart, I'm now going to walk around and identify what's light, what's dark, what's
that's
not.
Not the thing.
It's not about that, which sometimes we get caught up in thinking it's our duty to for some reason identify which is light. But for us to, when light comes into our lives, to be open to the fact that it might not look like what we expect it to look like, and the same for the opposite in the dark spots in our lives as well, to allow the light to penetrate that. It is a very personal message. Absolutely.
And also to make sure that as Christians we don't think that this is a one-time transition or transaction,
one prayer.
That happens when we maybe, as you grew up, you gave your heart to the Lord at one point. Now you're out of darkness and into light, and everybody else is in darkness, and you're in light. It turns out that's not really what's going on. It turns out that many Christians live in much darkness. And it turns out that many who aren't Christians have much light. So allow the Spirit of God to come personally and work within you, and just be aware that sometimes God's light looks like darkness. And be aware of that. And take note of those dark moments in your own life. That those are very often the brightest moments in your life. So, guys, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Yeah.
Let your little light shine, as the old song goes.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful Sunday.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next
See you
week.
soon.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.